Get inspired. Get motivated with M.A.Y.A and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A_Akai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to episode 14, which kind of had a 3-week hiatus, so to speak, because for the past 3 weeks, I did a special college career edition where I did some episodes on what I thought was really important to share with college freshmen. And I lateraled the conversation into high school freshmen. Now, mind you, though I picked those particular groups, I do believe that the information could be used whether you have a freshman in high school or a freshman in college, because either way, it's good things to know for your student, as well as getting them prepared for the emotional changes and challenges, the academic changes and challenges, and upping their game with financial literacy. 3-part series. So if you didn't get a chance to check out my special college career edition, of course, I'm going to say very shamelessly, you can always go to M.A.Y.A.Akai.com and you can hear all of my podcasts there. But of course, if you happen to have a podcast platform of choice, I'm okay with that. You can always find me on iHeart, Google, iTunes, as well as now I am in Amazon Audibles. So if that happens to be the way you like to listen to your podcast, guess what? Just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, voila. You can catch all episodes there as well. And remember, the reason I want to drive you to M.A.Y.A.Akai.com is only because with episodes, I have podcast companion information. So I always put something with a podcast I think that can be more insightful for you. So when you go to M.A.Y.A.Akai.com, you then just click on the podcast resource tab. And with each episode, I give you some extra nuggets of information to kind of help go along with the actual episode itself. So what better reason to go to M.A.Y.A.Akai.com? How many times have I said that? If nothing else, to get the resources. But of course, like I said, you can always find me on iTunes, Google, iHeartRadio, and now Amazon Audibles, which is all great. Of course, hopefully by now you are getting social with me. You're following me at M.A.Y.A_Akai on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, M.A.Y.A Akai Presents is the other way, obviously, you can get social with me, ask questions, give me a response to the podcast, all that good stuff. Your feedback always drives me to come up with new information. Remember, you can always join the conversation. Anytime you post a comment in the show, I'm going to then post it within the show, just like this. Hello, Chris Cole. So if you say something you want to share, I can share it with everyone who is listening as well to the episode. So share any thoughts you may have as well as we go through this. Okay. So like I said, we're at episode 14, a little time in between, but worthy, a good break to kind of mix it up a bit. Key thing that I want you to think about as we move into episode 14, as I always say, this is you and me time. This is time to focus on you. I like to believe that I put salient topics and conversation on the table. The key thing is to pull back that veil of self-doubt and sabotage that plagues so many of us, that keeps us from getting to that best version of ourselves. So as I say, this episode today is going to really tie into this. Find that comfortable spot for you. It is a Friday at 2, so you may be at work. So I understand it. You may be listening to this later. Either way, whenever you do listen to it, whenever you can be in that right mental space, it's always good. And if you happen to have free time today on this Friday, well, hopefully you can find that comfortable space for yourself, grab your beverage of choice, some coffee, tea, whatever the case may be, whatever works for you. And then kind of stick with me for the next 45 to 50 minutes as we jump into episode 14. Where you focus goes your energy will follow it. And this is so key because so often, and I cannot tell you that thoughts obviously are going to generate response, reaction. And one of the things I always say that we're consistently attempt to work on is to stop reacting to things and to learn to respond to things. But so often, if we don't have a good command of our emotions, which by the way means you have an even better grip on your mentals, as it's been said by others, then chances are you're always going to just react to something. And then when you reflect on it, you're not happy about the way you reacted. Well, the key thing is I want you to be able to get to a point where you learn how to respond, which means you are presenting that best version of yourself, how you truly want to respond to a situation opposed to react. And this is where your focus goes, your energy follows is so key. I say it all the time. And the reason I decided personally to do this episode is because I say, this is a growth point for me as much as it is for you. The reason I can stick with doing these podcasts, because I feel like it's just as therapeutic for me, and I hope that you get something from it too. But I had something that happened to me last week when I was actually on vacation. And again, where my focus went, my energy followed, and it turned into an awful situation that I had to go back and then choose to fix because it meant something to me, because it involved someone that I cared about. All because I hadn't processed some things the way I thought they had. Coming up in a week or two, we're going to have a really great episode about trauma. Don't shake in your boots. Don't get worried. I'm not saying you're traumatized, but I want to give you some perspective on the things that you may be pushing to the side and devaluing them, but not realizing how much impact they have on you. And that's what trauma is about. But trauma is a big word. And I think that's why people freak out with it. But that's coming up in a week or two, because I'm going to have on a guest with me who works specifically with a lot of individuals with trauma. So we can really chop up that conversation and help people gain some insight. So that's coming soon. But this mindfulness piece is huge. So where you focus goes your energy. And it's so key. One of the things that we talked about probably all the way back in episode 1 or 2, give or take, I would say, we had a really important conversation about understanding attachment styles, communication styles, all those things. So a lot of my episodes are worthy of going back and listening to, because I think if nothing else, you'll take a nugget or two about something that you've been struggling with or gain some insight about yourself while you're not getting to that best version of yourself in those earlier episodes. And some things won't apply to you at all. And it's okay. Remember, the key thing about My Ambition, Your Ambition, is we are working at a pace that's best for you. So guess what? This is episode 14. But if you're still hanging back in 10 because you're still doing the work, hang back in 10. Hang 10 until you're ready. Don't push through these quickly because you feel like you're trying to keep up with the episodes. No, keep up with the work you're doing in the episodes, and everything else will follow. Hence, where your focus goes, your energy will follow. A key thing about focus is we talked about early attachment can leave lasting challenges, difficulties, and mental flexibility. You get very rigid in your thinking. Emotional regulation, you choose to let anger, you can't control how you feel because you're not really able to have any flexibility in how you think. And obviously this adversely affects our ability to be empathetic, to really be able to connect and understand how other people feel, not be sympathetic. Being sympathetic with someone doesn't really lend great insight. Being able to connect with them and say, granted, this is not happening to me, but I can totally see where you're coming from and why this could be an issue for you. It's not my issue. And it may not affect me the same way, but I can respect the fact of this is where you're at with that. That's empathy. Emotional regulation piece. Compassion. And I'm going to share a piece about compassion a little later in the show when we take a break, something I don't do. But I think the piece, which is a PSA done by a good friend of the program, I think you'll enjoy it, about compassion. But connectivity. So when you have poor early attachment styles, you tend to not have empathy, compassion, or connectedness. If you happen to have the anxiety avoidant type personalities. One of the things I said about my attachment style that reared its ugly head last week when I realized my focus went south and my energy followed, and I behaved and reacted in a way, not responded, that I didn't want to, because I didn't realize I had some unresolved business. Let me tell you this. So with that being said, that connected piece is huge. Within my attachment style, I will tell you I'm secure. I am great with people leaning into me. I'm a support network for people. I feel very confident. It doesn't mean I don't waver occasionally and not feel the greatest. But generally speaking, I think I have a good level of self-esteem and confidence. But can I tell you, I realized probably last week, it's not as strong as I thought it was. And that's interesting. It's very, very interesting to say, oh, Maya, there's some hiccups in your self-esteem that you didn't realize you had, or your self-confidence wavered because of this. And the thing was, it was built into some past experiences that created this emotional piece for me that I thought I had processed. I know someone's going to say is, Maya, you're speaking so vaguely to this experience. I want you to tell us what it is. I will tell you what it is if you ask. If you don't ask, I'm going to keep talking about it in a very, kind of distant way. The key thing is, within my secure attachment style, what I am not comfortable with is relying on other people, leaning into other people, finding security that people will be able to be a safety net for me, partially because of two things. The first part is the most important part. One, as a child, I was taught to be independent and self-sufficient and legitimately not to rely on others. Well, I deeply internalized that because I struggle with being able to do just that. I have found people recently within friendships that I've been able to grow that way with. But if you would have asked me that 5 years ago, Maya, do you think your secure attachment style is 100% solid? I would have said, I do believe so. only to come to find out it's not nearly as solid as I thought it was. And it's something that kind of reared its ugly head a little bit more last week in a situation where I reacted really poorly to something. I mean, it was worthy of a response, just not the way that I responded. And then I had to go up and clean up my mess that I made because of one, I didn't use emotional intelligence. Guess what, guys? I didn't open up my toolbox. I didn't, because again, I didn't do the very thing today that I tell other people to do at that time. So it's interesting. So because of the fact that I have some issues within my attachment style, I responded accordingly. So one of the things that I think is important that I frequently talk to people about is mindfulness and being mindful. What's interesting is that when you're mindful, and there's a slight difference between the two though, when you're mindful, it allows you to kind of kick it up a notch when your mindfulness is there, because no matter which of these concepts you're working with, you decide to practice or work with, either can effectively upgrade your internal operating system. So people are like, what? And I'm using that framework today because I think if I talk to you in this concept of things that you frequently use and you understand how they work, it's going to help you to connect with you more, to see yourself the same way, and how you can be mindful or use mindfulness to achieve a greater level of emotional intelligence. But we're going to get into that in a bit. So remember I said, this episode's about is where your focus goes, your energy follows. And being mindful or utilizing mindfulness can make that even more salient for you. So toolbox time, everybody. Open up your toolbox. I say this every episode, and take out emotional intelligence and sit it on the table. Okay? Now, just in case I have to refresh, but by now I feel like this is the tool you know. Emotional intelligence, EI, refers to your ability to perceive, control, and evaluate emotions. So every single episode, open it up and take it out. The difference this time in this particular episode is that we're not going to actually close the toolbox. We're going to leave it open the entire show, because either you're going to start with putting being mindful in your toolbox, or you're going to go all out and be like, I'm ready for mindfulness. I'm putting that in my toolbox. So we're going to be putting some things in there today that are equally as important, that, by the way, makes your EI function far more efficiently than it ever would without it. Because being able to perceive, obviously, control, and to evaluate is about a regulation of your emotions. So being mindful versus mindfulness, we'll distinguish the two in a second, is important with understanding your emotional intelligence. So that toolbox is open. You've taken out your emotional intelligence, like I tell you every single episode. And we're going to dive into understanding where your focus goes, your energy follows. So let's talk about being mindful versus mindfulness. So let's get a little academic with it. So being mindful, if you were to look it up, it would be defined as conscious or aware of something, focusing on one's awareness on the present moment, or that inclination or willingness to do something. So it means you're aware. You're aware of a situation. So I'm going to really make it simple. It'd be like being mindful that it's raining. And so you dress appropriately, because guess what? You don't want to get your clothes to get wet. You're mindful of the situation, opposed to a person who doesn't kind of plan ahead and just kind of runs out the door. A mindful person often will have an umbrella in their house and an umbrella in their car, because they realize I'd rather be prepared for a situation than not prepared, because they're mindful of, if I get caught in the rain without the proper things to help me, well, I'm kind of screwed. That's being mindful. But it's also when that moment occurs, you're like, oh, my umbrella's in the car. Simple idea, but hopefully you can wrap your mind around it in that sense. So being mindful, it's conscious of aware of something. It's focusing on awareness in that present moment. It's being inclined or willing to do something. So most people will be like, well, how is that any different than being mindful? Well, here's the thing about mindfulness within its definition, so to speak, is that mindfulness is that state of being mindful. See, it's just that simple, fine line. It's going beyond the idea of being in the moment. It's the practice of maintaining a non-judgmental state of heightened or complete awareness of one's thoughts, emotions, experience on a moment-to-moment basis. Right now, somebody should be saying to me, oh my God, this feels exhausting already. And in theory, I'm going to tell you something. When you are trying to be fully engaged and you're trying to be mindful, without question, it takes work until you've learned how to do it effortlessly because it takes the unconscious and makes it conscious without working at it. But the thing is, you've trained yourself to do it. Whereas being mindful is that first step, and being able to have mindfulness as a tool that works on its own. It's like an autopilot. And let me tell you something. When you learn how to be a mindful person, when mindfulness is part of who you are as a person, your emotional intelligence and your emotional regulation go sky high. You know why? Because you are dialed in to what's going on with you. I always say to people, you can instantly tell. And this is one thing I picked up on my faux pas last week, where I behaved, I reacted to a way that I didn't like. But the thing was, I was using a little bit of my mindfulness, just not to the degree that I needed to, because I could feel the irritation rising. I got warm. I felt irritable. So I could already tell I was having a shift in my focus with the situation. I could tell, but I chose not to respond the way that I knew I should have after the fact. Now, sometimes I'm a firm believer that you can let your emotions be unbridled, but sometimes you need to be mindful of how you do that, because if it's going to cause more work to fix it, then you ought not do it. That's just the bottom line. And at some point in a certain age, you should be better at regulating your emotions, especially if you put the time in it to be more than mindful, but you're using mindfulness to help you understand. So let's say it one more time. Mindfulness is the state of being mindful. It's the practice, which means doing the work of maintaining a non-judgmental. That's a key word in this. Mindfulness doesn't mean you're trying to gauge or decide if something's right or wrong. You're just acknowledging that there's a state of heightened or complete awareness of something that's happening with your thoughts, emotions, experience on a moment-to-moment basis. So here's what you're not doing when you're being mindful. You're not trying to then say to yourself, well, I shouldn't feel this way because it's wrong. No, the key thing is you're saying, oh, I'm feeling some kind of way about this. Why? Why is this making me feel anxious? Why is this making me feel angry? Why is this making me feel irritable? Why am I feeling vulnerable? The thing is, you're sensing the shift in your thoughts, your emotions that the experience is creating, which hence goes into what? Choosing to react or respond. This is why mindfulness is so key. When I say where your focus goes, your energy will follow, because it is absolutely encapsulated in your emotional intelligence and how mindful you really are about a situation. So let's dive into being mindful and mindfulness. Here's what's key. Being mindful and mindfulness is a lifestyle change like anything else. And I'm going to tell you this. I think it's so interesting that when it comes to doing the heavy lifting for ourselves to get to the best version of ourselves, people are reluctant to do the work. Now, one, you perhaps maybe aren't happy with what you're seeing in yourself. And the hardest thing to do is to look into the mirror and to say, this makes me feel very vulnerable. I did it. And then turned, I still reacted poorly. But we're allowed to have, like I said, you take 2 steps back, but don't take 10. Just know that you made the mistake. And I knew I was making the mistake when I was doing it, but I did it one way or the other. So what it comes down to is that being mindful, being aware of something, but then the mindfulness is practicing continually being aware of something takes work. Now, it's interesting. I'm gonna give you a prime example of, and this is a gauge to tell you how much you are truly invested in yourself. I figure if you're listening to me still after 14 episodes, then there must be something here that draws you in. And I appreciate that we're doing the journey together. If you are willing to invest more time and energy in materialistic or concrete things than yourself, that's a deep reflection that you better look hard into. So the thing about it's a lifestyle change, the ways I say being mindful is it's really no different than, and people probably will connect with this instantly. You want to lose weight. And most of us who are overweight, I fall in that club. I've struggled with my weight for the longest time. I've never been a predisposed person to being thin. Unfortunately, I'm just on the thicker side, and it gets the fact, or my fat ain't PHAT either. But I've never gotten totally out of control. Real talk. I've always been mindful of when something wasn't going on. I knew it. The question is, what was I going to do about it? The way that made me think, feel, etc. The key thing was that when I decided I wanted to lose weight for me, I wasn't happy with it. I knew it was going to be a lifestyle change. And here's the thing. It wasn't like I had the kind of lifestyle where like I was like this overeater. I just have poor metabolism is what it comes down to. And unfortunately, obesity slightly runs in my family. So I just got dealt that gene and it sucks. And I know it. So I know to be able to lose and maintain weight, I always have to be mindful of what I'm doing. And I had to have a lifestyle change, which means one, had a shift in what I was consuming. I don't like using the word diet because remember I told you semantics is everything in language. So when you say the word diet to yourself, generally you're mentally shutting down because you believe that you're about to deny yourself of something that you really want. That's why people struggle with losing weight because we give ourselves all of these terms that make us feel like we're missing out on something, like we're punishing ourselves because we can't achieve it any other way. I wanted to lose weight in a way that was not extreme. I'm like, I wanted to be a lifestyle change and not a fad. Because I'd done fads before, and guess what? They worked. So I knew I had to have a shift in how I was doing things. So literally, I changed the way that I was consuming food. I shifted from I knew I wasn't going to be vegan because I wasn't really fully into giving up meat. But the idea of being more plant-based or clean eating, two concepts you can Google if you're interested, absolutely worked because it took away anything that was unhealthy, unnatural, extra preservatives. And you find that when you eat clean or you're plant-based, because by the way, being vegetarian or vegan does not mean you lose weight because you can still have pasta. See how that works? So I knew that I had to have a shift in what I was consuming. But the other issue for me was I had bad eating habits. I would be a person who would really ever eat breakfast. I might eat lunch and it might happen like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And if I ate dinner, it might be closer to 7 or 8. And here's the thing. I was a person that really ever cooked, which means I usually purchase most of my food, either fast food or go to a restaurant, and or I would do things that were prepared. So hence, everything about my lifestyle in regards to food, my relationship to food, wasn't about overeating. It was all the poor things I was consuming. So the first thing I knew is I had to change that. So one, I started training myself to eat 3 to 4 times a day. I made the time to do it. It was a conscious thing to do. And then I focused on what I ate, and then I started cooking. Small things I did, but it was a lifestyle change for me. And I never really had an issue with working out, but I found out that I would get bored with it. So then I started finding more creative ways to work out. And Lord behold, guess what? I lost the weight, but it wasn't a fad. I lost weight with fat, gained it back, and then some. It was the lifestyle change. So when you talk about practicing mindfulness, it's a lifestyle change like anything else. You have to be committed to it because if you're not committed to making the change, then chances are you getting to that best version of yourself. Folks, it's not going to happen. Real talk. Being the best version of you is a lifelong journey. And I think people don't get that. So when you're high, don't get comfortable. When things are working, push yourself a little further. You can sit in your comfort zone for a little bit, but don't get so much into it that you're afraid to be flexible or change because things will come along. You'll get thrown a curveball. And it's going to be incumbent about you to be able to make the shift. Remember, I talked about maybe episode 13, that the words challenge and change are not negative words as they're described. It's how we perceive them to be. They're about just shifts, movements in different directions. It's got nothing to do with it being good or bad. We assign good or bad to the words challenge and change because you know why? We live in a society that tends to do that. So the first thing you do is breaking free of a lot of societal norms and thought patterns, especially if they don't quite apply to you. So I'm going to give you a way to think about yourself in the context of maybe how you would think about how you take care of your car or your house, things you value, things that have value, and you want to make sure that you keep the value with them. I'm going to give you a concept, a working concept to go with. Just know, though, that practicing being mindful or mindfulness can be an effective upgrade to what I'm going to term your internal mental and emotional operating system. So just like I said, when people purchase cars, if it's an expensive car, guess what? People will wash, wax, it's never dirty, inside's clean, you do oil changes. To be honest, sometimes when people have less expensive car or car they don't care about, they tend to do half the things with it. They don't care for it the same way. So remember, I'm going to ask you the question again. How much do you care for yourself? Do you really see the value in getting to the best version of yourself? So like I said, I'm going to give you a working concept, okay? And in this working concept, we're going to have you as an internal operating system, aka an OS. For most of my Mac people, you'll do it. I'll even make it a little fun and say, this is how we're going to look at you. These are your components. It's a little silly, but it's kind of fun. And for those who are just listening, opposed to watching and listening, I have a cute little graphic on the screen where it's like a computer that's animated. It's got like a face and it's drinking coffee and the mouse has character about it. So this is going to be a working concept we're going to develop with you as an internal operating system, aka an OS. Okay. Now, within that working concept, thank you for doing the program, Corey Guthrie. Thank you. I figured the best way to help people to connect with mindfulness or being mindful was to give them a tangible thing that they could wrap their mind around, because we tend to be very methodical and linear in our thinking. So hence, if I can give you something to mirror how you can create this best version of yourself, perhaps people they'd be more interested in doing it, or it'd be a way that they can see fashioning their behavior accordingly. So hopefully it will make sense. All right, so like I said, we are going to make you a human operating system, a different concept, something that, it's not a new concept. It's been kind of talked about in different psychological things that I've looked at. So I liked it. And I've actually kind of used this as a concrete material thing because people struggle with intangibles. So I figured if I gave you something concrete, we could work with it. So the operating system, for those of us that are tech savvy, and I think in this age demographic, we all have a familiarity with technology. So the operating system is the core set of programs that runs the computer and upon which all other programs rely on in order to operate. So it's the thing that makes it move, that exists, that makes everything move forward. Okay. And generally speaking, with computers, even though most people have gotten to the point where, they use software to help with not getting viruses. Sometimes you have to clean your hard drive. We've become more mindful of how to care for our technology so that it lasts longer and we have fewer problems with it. So I want you to think about yourself in the same concept. So when we talk about that operating system, a computer's operating system, its OS, enables the hardware to operate and communicate with the software, okay? Hardware includes the physical components of the computer system, like the central processing unit, and things of that nature. So when we put things into those concepts, let's break it down a little bit more and let's make it the human operating system. So the human OS would be the brain. It's like that software, it's your cognitive ability and emotions are the programs you're running on the software. So look at it that way. But the reason mindfulness ties into this, and this is why this is so key, is that mindfulness can upgrade your internal operating system by helping you to make unconscious conscious. Think about that. It's going to make your unconscious conscious and create the space for you to reason and to make skillful responses. That's what mindfulness does for you. So a lot of times we say under the surface, that was in my unconscious. I didn't realize it was there. I reacted because unconsciously, I didn't realize that was something I was still struggling with. That was my explanation for my behavior last week, is that unconsciously something surfaced that I had unfinished business with and didn't know that I hadn't resolved. And when it came to the conscious, I was like, whoa, okay, but didn't know I was dealing with it until I sat back and really thought about it. So when you're mindful, it allows those unconscious things to become the conscious, which, like it says, creates the space for you to reason and then hence make a response that reflects more of what you really want people to see from you. Okay, so when we look at it that way about how mindfulness plays into this, let's break down that working concept down further about the human hardware, including so let's give everything apart in your working computer here. So we talked about human hardware. That would include those things like your brain, your nervous system, your body. It's those hardcore things. So like on a computer, it'd be like the screen, the mouse, the keyboard. See how it's a parallel there? So that's kind of like your human hardware, so to speak. When we talk about the software piece, that's the thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations that are going to kind of run, what's interesting enough, off of your OS. Now, at first, I had to think about if I agreed with how this was set up and thought, but I do, because it says, and this is based off of an article in Psychology Today and something I was kind of putting around in my head too. I'll post it on M.A.Y.A.com. Just go to podcast resource section, read the article, because I had kind of frameworked some things for myself. And then I read this article and said, do I agree or disagree? But then I thought about it and I said, I do agree. Because how within the article in Psychology Today, it said that the human OS consists of relationships to others, ourselves, and the world around us, as well as our spiritual connections for some people. And at first I thought, well, I would think more of the OS as being a brain. But no, a brain is hardware. It's just within it. The OS is all of those neurons and things that are running it. It's interesting. So I do agree that your OS, your operating system, are the relationships that you have with yourself and others and the world around you. And the reason that makes so much sense is because With all those things, we function in context. Our relationships with our family, friends, coworkers, whatever the case may be, often elicits a response from it. It creates the environment in which we function. That's what an OS is. It's the environment in which you function. So here's a key factor. Within your OS, you're going to assign meanings to your thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations. So hopefully this will make this piece make more sense to you. When I said that the human OS consists of our relationships to others, ourselves, and the world around us, but then I said because we assign our thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations, gather meanings from those environments. Now does that make sense? Because you do not live in a silo. You do not exist on an emotional island, though at times it may feel that way, but it may feel that way simply because of the interactions you have and relationships with others yourselves, or the lack thereof a relationship makes you feel like you are to yourself opposed to included with others. So it does make sense that our operating system that it is those relationships we have with others and ourselves. And when you employ mindfulness into this, that's when you begin to understand how this all really works. The article from Psychology Today is worth the read because I know I'm saying this and I know you're hearing me, but you might be like, click, click, click. Okay, this might be a little top heavy today, but it makes a lot of sense. If you go back to the podcast resource section at mayakai.com and read through the article and some others I'll have there, you'll see how this works. So when we talk about the idea, I want to plug something in for food for thought. How about that? And I said a little earlier, but now I want you to chew on this a bit. Do you care for yourself the way you care for other concrete and material things? I chose to use the idea of a computer operating system because people tend to be in tune with technology and they tend to take care of their technology, so to speak. But when I say that is people will have a high affection for their car, their house, other material things, and they will take care of them. I have these shoes I will only wear sometimes because I paid $500 for these red bottoms. And hence, I'm going to care for them and only wear them sometimes. I'm going to ask you, do you take that same care for yourself in regards to your thoughts, emotions, and how you behave? And I'm going to come to tell you this. Most people, generally speaking, are very willy-nilly with themselves. They tend to operate on the fly. They don't stop to think about how they're feeling. They fly off the handle. The people who tend not to do that are the people who have legitimately invested in themselves. We have learned from a consumer standpoint, there are things called high and low purchases, high emotional things. There's some things that are very emotional and take time and energy and work, like purchasing a house. Whereas a purchase of a car may be a mid-level emotional, and a purchase of an expensive watch would be a lower emotional purchase, or buying groceries. So understand that even within a consumer aspect as individuals, from an emotional standpoint, emotion drives so much of what we do, whether it's what we're purchasing, buying, what we're sharing with people. Our emotions tend to assign importance to things. And where does that importance come from? How you perceive things. So one of the things that you should definitely have in putting into your emotional toolbox is you should start to evaluate at this point, do you care for yourself the way you care for other concrete and material things? Or we could expand that conversation and say, do you care for yourself as much as you often care for others? We often can deflect our attention to others because it's the easy thing to do. Our children, our significant others, our friends, and we don't invest in ourselves because guess what? When you start to invest in yourself, you're going to find it's a little bit of heavy lifting because you may be some parts of yourself you need to change and work on. You don't want to because you don't want to step out that comfort zone. You don't want to give up those 3 C's, comfort, convenience, and control, because the minute those things are out of your reach or no longer the things that you actually can orchestrate, people get really uncomfortable because we believe that challenge and change are negative. Why again? Because the social narratives tell us that it is. And it's not necessarily that way at all. It's about your perception of it. A key function when we talk about of an operating system, and think about this, and this is where mindfulness plays in, is to update, correct programs, incompatibilities, discover errors, find security vulnerabilities. So operating systems upgrade overall function of a computer. This is exactly what mindfulness does for you. When you are mindful, you literally are looking for things that are not compatible with your happiness or what your long-term or short-term goals are. You're finding maybe some errors or issues in relationship dynamics, whether it might be work, friendships, significant others with your children, siblings, parents, whatever. You're seeing some things that aren't working in regards in issues. And you're also looking at, where am I vulnerable in all this? Am I putting myself in a bad position trying to help others when I know ultimately the outcome is not the right thing for me to do? So mindfulness is pretty much like an operating system, because it's consistently looking to give you those corrections to incompatibilities. It's looking to give you corrections or insight into issues or errors. It's looking to help you understand where there may be vulnerabilities that may actually shake your security in your emotional sense, your physical sense, financial sense. I didn't even talk about money at this point. But mindfulness plays into a lot of things. Like, do I really need to buy those things? I know it'd be nice to have them, but wants and needs are two things, just like self and selfishness, that people need to learn how to discern between what's really important. So, operating systems have key functions, as I'm telling you to think of yourself like an OS. And the thing is, are you aware of what's incompatible with your happiness and you getting to the best version of yourself? Do you understand the things that create issues or errors in your relationships with yourself as well as others? Honestly, for me, the self part is way more important than the others, because when you have a congruency with yourself, it tends to make everything else fall in place, real talk. When you are the best version of you, that flows into every other part of your life and people notice it. And are you willing to note what your vulnerabilities are? Have you discovered what they are, and are you willing to deal with them? Or are you going to pull within yourself and say, I don't want to do that because I really, really don't want to, I don't want to feel exposed. But you let other people expose you, but you refuse to expose yourself. So just remember, mindfulness, it gives you that ability to improve your overall functioning from an emotional, mental, physical, and even financial level. Because remember, it goes beyond being mindful. It is the practice. It is the state of being mindful that's constantly working towards helping you to understand all the things that are difficult often to process in the moment, because you're so overwhelmed. But when you learn how to use mindfulness as a tool, that can change. And we'll get to that in a bit. Here's something I want you to think about as we talk about the word mindfulness. Let's do a play on words. Are you being mindful of what you are filling your mind full of? Play on words, but it's worth really reflecting on. Let me say it again. Are you being mindful of what you are filling your mind full of? As your focus goes, as this episode is called, your energy follows. So if what you're putting into your head is negativity, constant conflict, just drama, what makes you think your energy is going to be anything different than that? Because that's what you're going to attract. They talk about the law of attraction. So people are like, oh, that's BS. It's not real. Oh, no, it's real. And I'm going to tell you something. The minute you right your ship with your energy, I'm going to tell you the world tends to shift, because you attract people to you. When people see positive energy and they see you're forward thinking and you're working hard, don't think for 1 minute that you won't necessarily attract somebody who doesn't have ill intention, because some people always like to, kind of grab onto your coattails. But the difference about you being mindful, you can weed those people out because you sense something isn't right with it. So usually when your flame is bright, you will attract all kinds of people to you. And you have to be mindful of that, because there's also another term called energy vampires, people who will come along and see you are robust and full of energy, and they want to cling on to you. They want to latch on. They want to suck it out of you. And the thing is, we have so many people in our lives that are energy vampires, and we don't have enough sense to know to let them go, because we always find some reason why we can't let people go. But it's never a reason, by the way, that's advantageous for you. Again, goes that conversation about knowing when to be mindful and mindfulness, but more importantly, when to be selfish and when to know when to be selfless. Self-preservation is a whole nother conversation we'll have in a different episode. Think about that as I take a drink of my drink of choice today is actually iced tea. Okay, so we're roughly almost 40 minutes into this. Let's do a mental check down, okay? Are you keeping tabs and are you happy, feeling satisfied? Are you feeling motivated? Do you keep tabs on yourself that way? We talk about being stuck all the time. But the thing is, before you get stuck, There's a lot of things that lead into that. And so for those of us that watch football, we talk about check downs, looking down the field, looking to see where your open receivers are, look to see if the coverage from the defense has now negated something that looked like it was open. So now you can't go there. That's exactly what a mental check down is for yourself personally, is looking at your situation in front of you. So let's just say you enter into a relationship with someone. And in fact, I'll give an example for me, a mental check down. I did it before I actually did it. So, met somebody. This was 2 years ago or so. And I could tell there was a host of issues with this person, mentally, emotionally, financially, seriously. But yet, I wanted not to be the person to believe that there couldn't be a chance of this person, just based on their situation with others, maybe just wasn't being the best version of themselves. And this is before I was even thinking about the idea of best version of yourself. I didn't want to write them off just because everything about them was not perfect, because nothing is perfect. But the level of imperfection with these individuals was glaring. I'm going to be honest. It was a project, but I was willing to go with it, even though right out the gates, the mental checkdown told me there were going to be red flags. And I'm going to tell you something. If I had stuck with doing my mental checkdowns, and I did, and what they told me, I never at one moment ever should have invested any time in a relationship with that person, because it ended exactly the way that you would anticipate, because the red flags were just that. And they were the kind of red flags that legitimately weren't going to be easily fixable. So keep tabs on if you're happy, feeling motivated, and satisfied in different areas of your life. So if you're not feeling motivated at work, why is that? Is it because you're tired of your job? You want to do something different? The work environment is toxic. Your coworkers are not good to be around. Are you satisfied in your relationship? And if you're not satisfied in your relationship with your significant other, ask yourself why. Is it you? Is it them? Is it us? What's the situation? Where's the lack of satisfaction? Do you not feel appreciated? Has things got stagnant? Ask yourself the real questions, opposed to just going through the motions. And this is what most people hate to do. You know why? Because especially within relationships, if it's comfortable, if it's convenient, and you have a certain amount of control of what's happening, most people don't want to give that up, because guess what? They don't like the idea of having to not be in that position. So they'll stay in a relationship until it runs its course. And at that point, you've probably given way more of yourself than you should have. And then you're really unhappy and you're bitter. And somehow you feel like it's someone else's fault. Well, that's a matter of opinion. I'm not in your relationship. It was a bad one. But I'm just going to tell you this. We often have enough insight to know when something isn't right. It takes more courage to leave than it does to stay. Okay. So that's the check down. I want you to do that frequently. I want you not just think about it. I actually want to make this a concrete thing for you. I want you to start to do mental check downs as we're working on the best version of ourselves, because this is something that I started to do with myself. And I want you to ask yourself these 3 things. Am I happy with me? Am I happy with my job? Am I happy in my relationship? If you happen to be in that situation. Am I feeling motivated? Is this like a job I feel like is fulfilling for me? Am I motivated in this relationship to stay happy and to do the things that really are required to have healthy relationships? Because just like cars and houses, as we talk about maintaining you, I hate to give you this awful news flash. Relationships are maintenance just like anything else. And just because you're with somebody doesn't mean you should stop appreciating them or working to make them happy as it should be with you. So do you feel motivated to do that, or have you just kind of lost a little bit of that? It's not going to be the same as it was when you started, but it shouldn't be totally off in oblivion at the bottom either. And are you satisfied? Are you satisfied with who you are? Are you satisfied with your job? Are you satisfied in your relationship? Look at yourself and ask yourself those questions in the mirror, because I want you to stare at yourself. And it's okay, by the way, if you answer yourself out loud. You can do it quietly. I'm good with that too. But you need to start to do those mental check downs to get a feel for where you are emotionally, mentally, and often even financially. So we're going to move past being mindful. But before we do something, I talked a bit about compassion, and I want to share this PSA with you because it's powerful. And I think right now in our current climate in this country, it's something that we've lost sight of. So I want you to listen to this We're going to come back and move on beyond just talk about being mindful and mindfulness and say, how can I employ these things? How can I make this happen? Because I do want to expand on my human operating system and to be better at things. I'm going to take a quick break, share this PSA with you about compassion, and the conversation will continue about where your focus goes, your energy follows. You're tuned into Maya, My Ambition, Your Ambition. This is episode 14. Sit tight. I'll be right back.
Compassion, noun. Sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. We're all born with it. It's in us. Don't believe me? When you hear a baby cry, something pulls at you. You want to ease that pain. You want to soothe that hurt. No one had to teach you that. It's called compassion, and it's in you. However, at some point you turned it off when it came to me.
Me. The cries of my soul have gone unheard, but today, you will hear me.
My heart has wailed a melody loud enough to shatter your ears, and you ignored me. But this week, you will hear me.
This body has beat the drums of anguish, only to be silenced. But this month, you will hear me.
This year,
this decade,
this century,
I will be heard, and
you will be the one to hear me.
And when I am finally heard,
show compassion.
Show compassion.
Show compassion.
Remember, it's in you.
That is a PSA from Chicago Together, created by Deanna Foster Reed, that tackles some of the difficult conversations about compassion and being seen and being heard. It's actually a 3-part series. That's part 2. The first one is about having a voice. So it's very powerful, but it's about compassion. And in today's world, I don't do a ton of social commentary. I could. We need more compassion. It's the one thing I feel is missing in any of the dialogue we're having right now. Everybody's talking, but nobody's listening. No one's hearing what's being said. And I'm one to say this. We need to get to a point where we start hearing one another. But as long as we're talking over each other and the social narrative we have going on right now, when it all settles down, guess what? The progress will be minimal. So compassion. It's one of the things that popped up earlier in talking about emotional intelligence and mindfulness, and how when you're mindful, compassion is one of the things that you have. And it's one of the things that should be in your toolbox. All right, so before we took that small little break, I said that we're going to move past being mindful to mindfulness at this point. Upgrading that internal operating system we told you that you have, that's that environment you function in. Your operating system is your environment. Those relationships you have with others, environments you function in, those are the things that tend to garner the type of influences that impact how you think, feel, and act. So making sure that you have the right people in your life, not toxic people, making sure you are in healthy environments, things that bring energy and not always take energy, is so key in all this. I cannot tell people how hard it might be to let a person go in your life that feels toxic and negative. And the number one people we can never do that with is our family, because we always feel like for some reason we're obligated to keep them on board because we're related to them. Where is that written that that's a necessity? If you have someone in your life that is legitimately toxic, if you find a hard time of getting rid of them, then keep them at a distance so that they don't absorb your light and your energy. So when you're working on your internal operating system by making that unconscious conscious, because when you become conscious, it helps you to create the space that you can reason and skillfully respond, AKA harness your emotions in a way that are positive and learn to respond versus react. That's what moving from being mindful to mindfulness means. So remember, being mindful is that state of awareness. You know something is there. You understand there might be situations that are not good or bad, whatever the case may be. Mindfulness is constantly practicing being in that moment and understanding without judging the moment what it means. You're not assigning value to the moment. That's the thing that's hard about mindfulness, and people struggle with it. It's like at that moment when you are processing a situation, it is not that time that you have to assign value to how it's impacting you. The key thing is to know that it's happening and it's impacting you is the biggest thing. Remember, mindfulness is the partner to emotional intelligence, because when you are in a space where your emotional intelligence is being used, you've taken out your toolbox. It allows for you either under stress, anxiety, fear, and anger to not lose your emotional control, hence have a good command that's called emotional regulation. And it gives you greater freedom of choice to respond intentionally, oppose and react. Remember, when you have mindfulness and your emotional intelligence, they're partners together. They sit in the front seat together and guarding how you respond to things. When you take the time to understand these things, you can respond intentionally with purpose. And responding with purpose is powerful. A lot of P's right there, but it's true. I'm gonna tell you something. People take notice. Sometimes people take offense to it when you're not wavering in your conviction because you've given it the time to know exactly where you stand on something. And by the way, sometimes you will stand alone, and don't be afraid to do that. That might be a situation with work. I'm not one to say that numbers behind you mean that it's always the right thing. Because sometimes people will stand behind you because it's the easy thing to do, not because they plan on taking a stand with you. When it comes to you about things that are better choices for you, never be afraid to have a voice and to have to stand alone. Just be comfortable in the choice that you're making and make sure it's the right choice. Because when you use emotional intelligence and your mindfulness are working together, you've come to understand that this may be something that doesn't resonate with everybody, but it's important to me at the core of who I am because it impacts me emotionally, mentally, physically, or financially. And every decision you make in life is not always going to be advantageous for everyone who's in your life. But remember, if you go back to those communication episodes we talked about, it's how you set that table to have a conversation with somebody, to have them understand you have importance to me, you have value, but understand this is the decision I'm making because this is what's best for me because of this. I understand you may not like it. It may not be totally advantageous for you, but at this moment, this is something that I need to do. This is where emotional intelligence and mindfulness helps you to be able to construct those conversations because you've dialed in and you've touched in with being in the moment and understanding what might be at stake. You should always know what the risk, and if you take a risk, what do you gain from it? If you are taking a risk and there's nothing to gain from it, I would ask you why you're taking it. Some people are just risk takers, but they also tend to live up flat off the seat of their pants, don't make quick decisions, and often tend to later in life say, I wish I hadn't done that. Don't you want to be the person who stops saying, I wish I hadn't done that? It's key. So what's the takeaway? How can you achieve mindfulness? We'll get to that. But what's the takeaway from all of this when it's all said and done? You're like, you made me try to make myself a computer, Maya. What do you think it is? Seriously, what's the takeaway? Mindfulness promotes emotional regulation and it mitigates impulsivity by increasing the gap between stimulus, what happens to us, that's the stimulus, and response, what we do with what happens to us. Mindfulness gives you insight of how to process these things. So that's the takeaway of this. I'll say it again. Mindfulness promotes emotional regulation and mitigates impulsivity. That's where we tend to get into trouble by increasing the gap between stimulus, the thing that's happening to us, and how we choose to respond, what we do with it. So that gap's a good thing. This is happening, but I'm choosing to respond in a way that's healthy and right for me and not reacting because it's drawn anger. Just because anger is illicit doesn't mean you must act in that vein. And that's what mindfulness helps you to do. It mitigates impulsivity because you're internally reflective. I always tell people mindfulness is kind of like Sherlock Holmes with Robert Downey Jr., where he plays out the scenario before it happens and then boom, it happens. That's where you should be aiming to get to. So how can you achieve mindfulness? A couple things. One, make time for yourself. Create time for you mentally and emotionally to unwind daily. For me, it's often in the morning. I actually meditate, and everyone's on a meditator. Everyone's like, I'm not candle meditating yoga. It's not me. But remember, invest in you like you would invest in anything else that has value. So assign time for yourself, whether it's the first thing in the morning or you get home at night. Assign at least 15 minutes that you can reflect on your day and where you're at. 2, create, and this is key, create a space for yourself. I always say in my episode, find that comfortable space, grab your beverage of choice, find or create that space that allows you to connect with you. It might be a favorite chair or your couch. Some people, it's their man cave, it's her she shed, whatever it is that allows you to feel comfortable. It might be a room that just has candles in it. I love candles. So just whatever allows you to feel tranquil and at peace, because this is where mindfulness exists, when you create spaces that are peaceful, not chaos. The next thing is pay attention to your mood, thoughts and emotions during this time without judgment. So if you're angry, like say you sit down to start your reflection period and you're feeling angry and anxious, it's okay. The thing is, I just need you to mentally note when you start this, how do you feel? Because then the next thing about mindfulness is, why do I feel this way? The next thing is capture the moment. How do you feel and do you know why you feel that way? So what mental, emotional, and physical responses are you sensing? The 3 and the 4 are kind of the same, paying attention. But once you pay attention to it, capture it. Don't forget it. Because remember, mindfulness is being in the moment, but also kind of keeping this mental Rolodex of, these are different things that are happening with me. This is what's going on. Because you might need to go back to that Rolodex and flip back to that card to make a notation of, when this happened last time, this is how I felt. No repeat performance on impulsivity. I'm about to mitigate that because I'm going to be mindful on this. And 5, let the moment be what it is without feeling you have to fix it now. So, if you're angry or you're feeling hurt or vulnerable, be it. Let your emotions exist. Like we say, when you open a bottle of wine, let it breathe. So when you open your mind, your heart, your soul, let it breathe. Don't feel like you got to corral it in and make it fit someplace else, because you don't. Let it breathe. And once it breathes, then you can process it properly. Because remember, it's hard to process emotion when you're in it, until you've learned exactly what the emotion is. And when you see it again, you know what it looks, feels, and it touches and tastes like. And you know you don't want it, but you won't know it until you let the experience unfold. So let your emotions breathe. Part of being mindful is clearing space to let it happen. So before you begin, I didn't dive deep into this, but before you begin and you find that space for you, that's your quiet, your tranquil space, take 10 deep breaths from me and allow the moment to open. So sit down, however you're doing it, and just breathe in deep, hold it for like 2 seconds, let it out. Do it 10 times. And I know this sounds crazy, but you will find an inner peace kind of flow out of you, especially as you're feeling the breath fill your lungs and you're watching it leaves. It can help you calm down and just kind of clear your mind. When your time is up, and this daily reflection from mindfulness, I said, when your time is up, allot 10 to 15 minutes to yourself. I'm okay if you give yourself 30. But if you got a very busy day and you can only give yourself 10 to 15 minutes, give yourself those 10 to 15 minutes. And just like you opened up that moment of reflection, taking deep breaths to be mindful, give yourself 10 breaths to close it down. And the other thing is, feel free to have your eyes open or closed, whatever you feel comfortable with. You may have music. You may have absolutely quiet. The room might be lit with candles. It might be dark. It might have sunlight coming through. This is the space you're granting for yourself. So you're creating this tranquil space. So it can be whatever you want it to be. I want to give you a closing thought. Viktor Frankl described in The Man's Search for Meaning on how he survived horrors and life in Nazi death camps during World War II. It's a very interesting read, and it's a short read. He wrote, between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is the opportunity to choose our response. And our response lies our growth and our freedom. And that's what mindfulness, ultimately, everybody, is really about. Thank you for tuning in to another episode 14 of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. As I said, the whole purpose of this podcast is to help you to identify your ambitions, harness that motivation to help you acquire the success and satisfaction, getting to that best version of yourself. Remember, like I said, all episodes you can find on iTunes, Google Play, as well as iHeartRadio podcasts, and now available in Amazon Audibles. To search M.A.Y.A, M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. As well as, if you want to do the simple route, you can just go to MayaAkai.com, and there's all the podcasts there. And of course, there's going to be some companion things for this podcast. So just click on the podcast resource section, and you can read some additional things I think that will be good for you. Also, get social with me. You can always follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Maya_Akai. And of course, you can always find me on Facebook, Maya Akai Presents. I'm assuming you're here, so you probably find me. And I do have a YouTube channel. You can subscribe to me, is there as well. That's it for episode 14, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. As I always say, until next time, everyone, remember, your present becomes your past and your future is no more. So make the most of every single day, because you know what? You don't get it back. And if you don't use it, you know what they say, you lose it. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. See you next week for episode 15. I think it might be equally as titillating. All right, everybody, have a good one.
You feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know M.A.Y.A.
Acronym My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at MayaAkai.com.